Good evening, everyone. My name is Don Oliver, and it is my pleasure to act as your guide at this Missoula unveiling of what has come to be called simply the Quilt. Formally, it is known as the NAMES Project AIDS Memorial Quilt. You will soon see it spread out across the floor in front of you. But first, I would like to welcome to the microphone the President of the University of Montana, George Dennison.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and welcome to this display of the NAMES Project AIDS Memorial Quilt. We of the University of Montana feel honored to host this exhibit as a fundraiser for the Missoula AIDS Council. More importantly, we consider it an educational opportunity to help inform all Montanans about the HIV and AIDS epidemic and how it touches our state and our nation. I can think of no more appropriate setting for the state's largest ever exhibit of the quilt than the University of Montana campus. A university's basic mission, after all, requires that we seek to educate, to open minds and hearts. We seek to pursue precisely that goal this weekend with our students, staff, faculty, alumni, and the greater Missoula and Montana communities, who will view this moving tribute to the more than 800 individuals represented who suffered abruptly and painfully abbreviated lives because of this horrible disease. The work and contributions of many partners within the community made this educational effort possible, including several businesses whose contributions helped make the quilt or bring the quilt to the university and will help the Missoula AIDS Council continue its good work with people who need it in western Montana. I want particularly to thank publicly Senator Dave Watson-Reed for his help in getting the quilt shipped here from its home base in Atlanta, Georgia. In addition, I want to recognize the hundreds of volunteers from all walks of life who came together to organize this display and will continue to work through the weekend. In a very real sense, the community involvement making this event possible manifests Robert Bella's oft-quoted description of what it means to partake in a common culture. As he put it so eloquently, a culture is in reality an ongoing conversation about things that matter among people who care. I take pride in the example that the Missoula community has set. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much, President Dennison. I would now like to call on the Missoula Men's Chorus, who will engage us in a couple of performances. Thank you.
Bring it home.
Thank you very much, the Missoula Men's Chorus. This display today of the quilt, which will last through Sunday, is a joint project of the University of Montana and the Missoula AIDS Council. Representing the AIDS Council is its Executive Director, Carrie McWilliams.
Since the mid-'80s, Missoula AIDS Council has been a statewide leader in working to prevent new HIV infections, while also advocating for and supporting individuals who are living with HIV and AIDS in our state. Today, nearly 27 years since the first AIDS cases were reported in our country, we often hear the story of the epidemic told through numbers. 56,000 new HIV infections each year, an estimated 500 Montanans living with HIV or AIDS in our state. And while the numbers and statistics are important and help us to grasp the magnitude of this epidemic, numbers alone fail to reveal the names and the faces of the thousands of people who have died from AIDS-related illnesses. So tonight, we gather as a community to remember and honor our loved ones, to remember those names and those faces, and to share the true stories of life, of love, and of loss. So on behalf of Missoula AIDS Council, our staff, our board of directors, and the clients that we serve, I want to extend our most sincere thanks to the University of Montana for hosting this event and for providing the opportunity for us to bring the largest display of the names quilt to the state of Montana. In addition to the university, I also want to thank our major sponsor for the event, Community Medical Center. Our other generous sponsors include First Interstate Bank, Southgate Mall, and the Montana Cancer Specialists. They, along with many other individual donors and many other businesses in our community, have helped to raise thousands of dollars for Missoula AIDS Council. And I stand before you as a promise for that money raised, that we will continue to make sure that the youth in our communities know how to protect themselves from this virus. We'll use those funds to purchase more HIV tests so that all Montanans know their status. In addition to those who have given financially, I also want to thank and acknowledge the nearly 100 volunteers who are helping to make this 4-day display possible. And as you can imagine, an event of this size requires a great deal of planning, so I also want to briefly acknowledge the members of the planning committee that made it all possible. Rita Munzenreiter, Director of University Relations, served as co-chair for the planning committee. Rita lost her brother to AIDS in '94, and before he died, he told her that the way that she could make the biggest difference was to educate as many people as possible about this disease. And tonight, Rita, I think your big brother would be very proud. The other members of the committee include Mary Muse, the Director of Adams Center, Brianne Burrows and Ray Davis, University Relations staff, Missoula AIDS Council board members Steve Knight, Morgan Halverson, and Lisa Carter, and Missoula AIDS Council employees Krista Weathers and Mike Wessler. They all put a tremendous number of hours and a whole lot of heart into making this event possible. And finally, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight as we honor and remember our brothers and sisters, our friends, our lovers, our partners, our aunts, and our uncles. As many of you know all too well, the quilt is powerful and it's moving, but it's also a call to action. So I encourage each of you, when you leave here tonight, to invite someone to come and see the display this weekend. Because it's our belief at Missoula AIDS Council that working together as a community, we really can make a difference, and we can prevent another Montana panel being added to this quilt because it's already far too large. Thank you.
As many of you may know, the Names Project has its headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, but sections of the quilt are on the move across the country all year long. That's more than 44,000 individual panels commemorating the life of someone struck down by AIDS. Displays of the quilt are coordinated by the National Office of the Names Project Foundation. Here today to represent the National Office is Ms. Gert McMullen, who has come here from Atlanta, Georgia.
In June of 1987, a small group of strangers gathered in a San Francisco storefront to document the lives they feared history would forget. I was a part of that group. We had nothing in common other than the anguish, pain, and anger of watching our friends die and no one seeming to care. The Names Project began as an activist movement to shame our government into taking action against this horrible disease. Each panel, measuring 3 foot by 6 foot, the size of a human grave, would be laying down in front of the White House. We were laying down our dead. We were naive in believing that this one event would change everything. We thought we would save the world that day. We were wrong. 20 years later, we are still bringing our dead to communities all over the country and the world, educating in compassion in the hopes of bringing an end to AIDS. I am frequently asked if the quilt is still relevant today and how. I could choose to read off statistics and the different communities that AIDS is now sweeping through, but my guess is that most of you here today are quite aware of these facts. Instead, I choose to tell you a much more personal story of the quilt's relevance. In 1987, the devastation of losing my friends was overwhelming. I truly thought that I could go on no longer. Then I found the Names Project. It's hard to believe that a simple piece of cloth could bring so much healing, but in all honesty, it saved my life and continues to do so today. Throughout these 20 years, I have watched hundreds of my friends die and have completed hundreds of panels for them. I've also had the honor of helping thousands of people make panels for their loved ones and watch them heal as little as I have. Nothing has changed for us at the Names Project. Panel makers continue to come through our doors asking for assistance in completing a panel for a loved one, and we receive panels through the mail on a daily basis. Helping these people get through the pain and loss is what we are honored to do. It has in more ways than one saved our lives. Our vow to every panel maker is that we will not let their loved ones be forgotten. We are honored to do so and will continue to do so until we find an end to AIDS. Thank you.
Now, if you'll look down on the main floor, volunteers are beginning to unfold and display the panels of names of AIDS victims. And honored guests from the University, Missoula, and Western Montana will read the names of those represented on the panels. Jim Foley, U of M Executive Vice President.
Good evening. It is a privilege and an honor for me to begin the reading of the names. Harold Chandler, Larry Culp, Thomas H. Berzozowski, Martin Cox Martinez, Joanne Ruiz, Michael J. Schubert, Patrick Darwin Watson, Charles Crow, J. Michael Cantrell, Pete Peterson, Larry Klosky, Ron Brown, Foy Fish, Paul Sintel, John Ellis, who was a longtime professor here at the University of Montana, Walton Ewan, Meade Torrey, Brad Warren, Steve Powers, Christine Boyd Dapolo, Henry Walter Weiss, Randolph John Giddings, Raul Gramani, Bobby Wheeler, Howard Bihar, Mike Mollusky, Bob S. Royce P. Warlick III. Louis Painter. David Thomas. Van Douglas. David E. O. Rath. Edward Alton East. Irwin Michael Callis. Joe Neil Llewellyn. Charles Dutton. David Garland Kinney. David Wilson. Roy Clayton Crump. And Bill Bolivar.
Lori Copps, Montana Department of Health and Human Services, HIV/STD Section Supervisor.
Thank you. Frank Cassius. Kevin James Davis. Kevin Norbert Espinoza. Michael G. Herrera. Tom Humphreys. Derek Jonas. Michael King. Danny Love. John Love. Kenny Metzger. Michael. Robert A. Buddy Navarez. Steve E. O'Quinn. Ron. Lawrence D. Thomas. Henry James Purvis. Jeff Wadlington. Mark Burns Sweeney. Neri Dorval. Allison. Reverend Peter Van Allen Hain. Bruce Bradley. Kenneth Buckley. Duncan Campbell. Ron Castleman. John Caswell. Dwayne Chenoweth. Jim Clark. Norman Crosby. Carlos Cruz. Neil Eisenberger. Michael Geddes. Dwayne Gilmore. Peter Hain. Rick Hedrick. Roger Leonard. James Markunis. Rob Mayer. Dennis Nelson. And Jim Norwood.
Montana State Senator Dave Wanson-Reed.
Robbie, Dennis Roy, Kirk McGregor Buckley, John Boyer, Robert F. Donahue, Greg Hucka, Paul Clark, Todd Thompson, Doug Graver, Victor Ray Phillips, Max, John R. Boyer, Philip Yerg, Robert Wayne Dines, Richard Unterbrink, Patrick Kuntz Ragland, Steve Johnson, Thomas Blake Blakesley, Ron Clements, David, Patrick A. Doyle, Robert M. Dunn, Grady Michael Evans, David M. Green, John R. James, Bruce Langdon, Patrick R. Mahoney, Jim Mannon, David S. Meisler, Kenneth M. Moomey, William Al Norris, Dwayne Schambert, Sergei Shuskil, Ed Sully, Ted, John Paul Warren, Michael Dennis White, Jeffrey Nyland, Robert Wayne Edwards, and Michael A. Conley.
Judy Nielsen, Montana Department of Health and Human Services, HIV Programs Coordinator.
Douglas Yaranon, Jim Georgitas, Jerome of California, John Talbot, Frank Balikio, Carlos Shancone, Daryl Reese, Kevin Lundgren, Raymond Lopez Jr., Ray Gielan, Perry Ellis, Peter Bromilo, Roberto Robledo, Philip Brown III, Louis John DeGino, Boyd A. Blackburn Jr., Tony P., Richard Felton, Ed Grant, Sam Green Jr., Tony Bonavita, Timothy Paul Broxson, Steve White, John C. Yates, Angelo Dongia, John M. Skillman Jr., Errol Pasteur, Halston, Bruce Hilbrook, Leonard Vargas, Louis F. Homiak, Federico Luis Pedruchetia, Kathy, St. Clara Peaches, Roger Spiker, Easy E, Boo, Johnny Garcia, Eric Easy E. Wright, Paul C. Clark.
Trevor Hunter, President of the Associated Students of the University of Montana.
Steve, Kevin Regan, Sandy Moore, David Naito, Michael Morris, Dr. Ted Robinson, George, Chat Alcula, Jake Dunman, Kelly Roon, Keith Austin, Paul, Bobby Smith, Bill and Carol Walker, Rod, Carl Grant, Dan Lindsay, Shane Ladner, Robert and Carolyn Lomack, Carl Henderson, Rick Hartzell, Bren Geiger, Phil McIntyre, John Shepard, Al Wagner, Alan M. Colburn, Randy Edwards, Craig Sampson, William H. Barkus III, Rick A. Summers, Kenneth G. Pickle, Lou Louis Rufflin, John Joseph Wolski, Truett Leon Truebug Evans, Timothy Hawkins, Paul Wilkies, Mario Tamayo, Colin Higgins, Stewart of California, and Ed Millis.
Morgan Halverson, Missoula AIDS Council Board President.
Randy Shields, Randy White, Richard Gay, Robert Hanson, Eric Morton, Frank Potter, Brian Molitor, Cal Boynton, Jess Short, Jim Goodlow, Bernie Sanford, Greg Rogers, Ray Ramp, Dwayne Russell, Jan Leeser, Darren Horan, Jim DePaul, Vaughn Duell, Chris Curry, Gene Freeman, Tim McCall, Tony Ferrea, Steve Brooks, Bo Spacek, Rick Stack, Jim Harner, Henry Dibbling, Ron Motter, Michael Wheeler, Bill Naves, Jim Carney, Art Prillman, Jim Colcord, Frank Hecker, Robert B. Wicker Jr., Stephen Rodriguez, John Pancho Yarborough, Joseph Periotti, Jimmy Finzel, Stuart Mark Eisenberg.
Robin Selvig, Lady Grizz head basketball coach.
Bob Meadows, Timmy Smithwick, Jim Beecher, Richard Donovan, Howard C. Sears, Mick Wallace, Scott Stanton, Joel Reed, Jerry Johnson, Richard Pelly, Michael Boyd, Gary Luthauser, Louis Angelostro, Bob White, Fred Ginsberg, Mike Abling, Tommy Brown, Chuck Frank, John Bishop, Bill Gluck, Carl Grant, Arthur Wilfield, Jerry Schatzer, Bill, Tyrone Lavin, Neil Aberman, Morgan Ellis, Michael Harris, Michael Laba, Jerry Frankel, Martin Miller, Jorge Cervera, Doug, Tim, Vic, Richard Eidemann, Bruce Richard Taylor, Bill Wyke, Bill Pope.
Lady Grizz starting guard, Sonia Rogers.
Dean Allen Saleh, Joe Chote, John Paul Boles, Herb Caro, Tim Davis, J.T. Wilson III, Stephen Shiflett, Jerry, Jose L. Fernandez, David Brumbach, Sean Kelly, Stephen L. Williams, David Owens III, David B. Stewart, Dan Dotson, Nori Kuzma, Jerry, Freddie Smith, Michael Peterson, Jack Merchant, John Christian, Chuck Grimm, Blair Edlow, Frank Mewson, Ken Schramm, Michael Meek, Robert Joppy, Jeff Moreland, Dean, Bill Tatum, Michael Miller,
Joe Cooley, David Brumbach, Stephen Kent, Frizzle, Felix, Frank, Marty Paulson, Jimmy Lacey, and Robert Key.
Before we go on, any of you who choose to do so may move down to the center floor and begin looking at the quilts that are down there. Our next speaker, Wayne Tinkle, coach of the men's basketball team.
Jose Saez, James Beaker, Michael Jones, Danny Hauk, Ted Ladd, Glenn Miller, John Dominic Grillo, Jim Fuller, Cesar Oscar Vasquez, Fred Hibbard, Gary Johnson, Robert Scotty Scott, Richard Donovan, Dennis Ryan, John Chatburn, William Bill Connors, Paul Maryland, Rob Fry, David Tibbetts, John Brower, Jerry Adams, Don Scott, Michael Bridges, John Goodwin, John E. Morgan, Reggie Sievenpiper, Boyd Holland, Billy Porter, Peter Roker, Carrie Hamner, Paul Woodville, Larry Brown, Bill, Bob, Charles, Chris, Dale, David, Dean, Dick, Don.
Jordan Haskett, senior forward on the Grizzly basketball team.
Doug, Jay, Jeff, Jerry, Jim, Joe, Johnny, Leo, Mac, Martin, Matt, Max, Norman, Ray, Richard, Ron, Rusty, Tom, Wayne, Don England, Kent Warner, Scott Duncan Holliday, Dr. Tom Waddell, Marty Schwartz, Brad Kane, E. Lamont Johnson, Ruben Vasquez, Philip E. Johnson, Roger Horwitz, Jay Grossman, Luis Ortiz, Blanca Maritza Mendez, David E. Wilson, Reverend Carl Bean, Willie Smith, Clarence White, Kent Sven Cedarberg, Reed Katz, Peter Reinarson, and David Stites.
Sheila Callahan, a Missoula radio personality.
Alan L. Taylor, David Pickford, Carrie Etchberger, Patrick W. Guilfoyle, G. Kit Zoll, Marty Purcell, Chuck Grimm, John L. Gherkin, DDS, Robert V. DiLoretto, John Belskus, Amanda Blake, Lynn Hilton, Ed Brinkley, Justin Smith, Leonard Frey, Liberace, Leonard Horowitz, Angelo Donia, Ed Mock, Michael Bennett, Scott Ross, Bruce Weintraub, Lachlan Barker, Willie Smith, Thierry Leleron, Charles Roberts Jr., Edmund Galtney, Robert Mapplethorpe, Martin Burgoyne, Joe McDonald, Bill Hellbach, Chuck Solomon, John Hirsch, Ricky Wilson, David Jonathan Miller, Angel Estrada, Howard Bruckner, Michael Taylor, David Hicks, Wei Bandy, and Steve DeLeon.
Coach of the Grizzly football team, Bobby Houck.
Joe Swain, Ben Welch, Wendell, Terry Williams, George Michael Sims, Susie Toth, Frankie, Eduardo Gonzalez, Kirby Hook, Jim Burton, Myron Sanger, Thomas James Mooney, Rob Cole, Mark Edward Gruber, Stephen Wayne Harmon, Frederick R. Mitchell, Ron Mansfield, Milton Edwin Walker, Michael R. Carl, Frank Allen Carl, David Leon Dave Wilson, Lucky Clark, John M. Schneider, Michael A. Curcio, Joey, Uncle Terry, Jeffrey William Seelan, Mary Ellen Anderson, Craig Artman, Rick Barnett, Gary Eldred, Cookie Capelli, Everall Daly, Ducky, Steve Finley, John Goodfellow, Keith Hardy, Randy Johnson, Daryl Larson, and Nelson Pillowan.
Rita Munson-Ryder, University Relations Director and a family member.
Ray W., J. and C., Timothy A. Tim Mulholland, John L. Mendoza, Greg Haas, Tim Haas, Doug Morehart, Stephen Losey, Kevin Buchanan, Shad Duncan, Dale, Ron Duda, Mitch Kincannon, David L. Davies, Charles Edward Wright, Tyrone, Jimmy Christensen, Gary R. Fusen, Ned Hutchins, Joanne Williams, Michael Oliver Parman, Mitch W. Burfield, Lawrence E. Larry Roeder, Edward W. Skaggs, Gary K. Lemley, Roger Dwayne Stevenson Young, Curtis Lee Babcock, James Anthony Thomas, Robert Benjamin Manley, Timothy J. Johnson, Dr. Michael Getz, Michael Langdon, Brian Weddle, Mark Miller, Carlos Montero, Steve Oster, Rick Rourke, my Helena High School classmates, Larry Watson and Jean Roland Sherlock, and my brother, Stephen Munzenrider.
Rosalie Buzzes, Missoula Flagship Executive Director and a family member.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Marvin Feldman, Hank Smith, David Brownlee, Mark D. Bell, Lars Pell, Bill Kuchera, Jerry Baby Cakes Pestroff, Artie J. Bresson, Council Wright, Wes Widener, John Berger, Rick Angulo, Rick or Ricklet Martinez, John Murphy, Flavia and Fernando Barcelos, Jerry Frankel, Kenny Wayne Spalding, Edgar Wiseman, Dennis Schaus, Nick Nudo, Bill Harwood, Jim Atherton, Greg Courtney, Larry Danella, Ernie Smith, Mike Strunks, Buck Lukenbach, Barry Greenberg, Evelio, Rock Hudson, Donald, Wendell Ward, Rick Stover, Bob White, Dusty Cunningham, Art Espy, Bill Fitzmaurice, Tom Garrett, Bob Krebs, and my brother Stephen Munzenrider.
Rick Holman, Executive Director of the Butte AIDS Support Services.
Patrick Loomis, David Murray, Bill Smith, William Miller, David Peterson, Craig Shane Newby, Frank Connolly, Lenny Siegel, Dale Tonkin, Bill Tabor, Michael Click, Brad Tornson, Def Allen Nelson, Roger Moncton, Daniel Draper, Philip Anderson, Richard Brown, Hugh Connie, Michael McVeigh, Damian Hahn, David Myers, Tom, Frank David Kerner, Ray L. Burnham, George G. Jones, James Bass Wyanhut, Richard Wayne Harrison, Eddie Soto, Michael Scott Carl, Len Salco, Denise Ann McCormick Temple, James Byron Baldwin Jr., David Stevens, Michael Stevens, J.R., Ray, Matthew David Thomas, Brad, Gary Burden, Richard Smith, Mark Smith, Lee Denning, and my partner, Tony Ray Montgomery.
Nikki Graham, Salish Kootenai College AIDS Prevention Task Force.
Thomas Tom Frederick Vazzini, Stan Waldall, Robert Allen Spector, Larry Zentis, Gerard R. Gantier, James Mason, Jimmy Smith, Alan Dominguez, Bobby Wright, Larry Jewett, Baba Jajay, Robin Brookins, Joey Van S. Ballesteros, Ron Spike Brock, Neil Dickerson, Rick Mosher, Ruben Oliver, Randy McCormick, Michael P. Richardson, Scott Kelly, Joe, Tim, Gerald Jerry Hodges, George L. Delperdane, Rick, Donald K. Long, Jr., Sally Jo Clausen, Benjamin Robert Clausen, Audie J. LaPierre, Thomas J. Rowlands, Michael Wright, Austin James Coco, Jr., Robert F. Ortwine, Clyde J. Southward, Julio Martinez, Chucky Chivinston, Rick, Kenneth A. Pitts, George De La Torre, Fred Smith, and Dave Donaldson.
Bill Muse, Associate Vice President for Planning, Budget, and Analysis, and a family member.
Paul, Art, Jerry, Jimmy, Damon, Mike, Jim, James, Evan, Jay, Victor, Cindy, Patrick, Jerry, Lonnie, Mac, Steve, Jack, Bob, Jim Christensen, Mitch Kincannon, Betty Jo, Skip, Rob, Ricky, Lee, Michael, Randy, Dewey Holler, Andrew Pearson, Garrett Welling, Rhea Barnes, Danny Paul Fontenot, Andrew Harold Drew Lewis, Jack Moulton, Father Howard Coleman, Brother Anthony Bouchard, John Daniel Jr., Bart Gardner Copeland, and Jack Sears.
Krista Weathers, Missoula AIDS Council HIV Prevention Coordinator.
Pablo Paul Trujillo, Ken Guillaume, Kenneth Siciliano, Ken Letner, Rob Eichberg, PhD, Jeffrey DeLeo, Stephen Chambers, Sandor Tribe, Ted Prince, Ralph John Richter, Dr. Keith Hansen, Dennis A. Roberts, Gary Clinton Long, Eula Brown, Laverne Brown, Samuel Orrin Caver Jr., Robert Crenshaw, Arthur West Forbes, Lee Mathis, Brandy Ray Vargas, Robert Chris Ty Vasey, Leroy Kittleson, Donald Ray Rice, Scott Whitney, Douglas C. Martellaro, Larry Cox, Nick Richard Pappas, Timothy Darfler, John Harriet, Richard Jones, Tom Kavlik, Brad Hyatt, David Howard De Adorno, David Leroy Anderson, John Johnny Lucas Westcott Jr., Bert the Fox Aguilar, Kevin Anderson, Joanne Blakely, Patty Blakely, Bobby, and my Uncle Stanley Bowen.
Jimmy Wilson, who lost his lover.
Wesley, Gregory A. Pickett, Richard Connor, Robert David Sparks, Jay Don, Jana Waddell, David L. Hazen, James William Howard, Joe, Madonna Mae Jennings, Ronald Lynch, Joel Bergmark, Lewis E. Wells, Bill Henley, Leroy Skipper Lopez, John Gibson, Jim Blair, Ed Millis, Father Bernard Castola, Ray M. Browning, Glenn Dime, Martin, Richard LaFontaine, Kennedy Darrow Ewell, Michelle Renee Bremer, Stuart A. Hurdle, David Diaz, Maurice Trenton, Richard A. Rader Jr., Jason A. Lee, Tom, Virginia, Cece, MJ, Terry Wilson, Michael, Randy, Cletus, Tim, Beth, my other two partners, James Sawtell and Michael J. Roadarmor.
Kay Whitlock, who lost nearly 50 friends.
Joe, Eric Maurice Estes, Kenneth David Bryant, John, Frank, James H. French, Jim Schultes, Stephen Allen Goodman, David A. Neiman, John William Berglund, Michael Frescone, John M. Seeley, John Nolan, Wayne Allen Bell, Edward Millis, Danny Kellum, Gary Adams, Ricky Ray, Michael C. Miller, a good friend and political co-conspirator, Mel Boozer, Michael Quinn Antle, Gary A. Fry, Joseph D. Felicibus, Kenneth W. Minnick, Willie Joseph Wright II, Joseph Christopher Ponte, Charles S. Drucker, Robert Chesley, Antonia Ferreira, Andre Alexis Chissot, Robert Fernandez, Al, Steve Ansobahare, Evelise Hernandez, Robert Bobby Berman, Michael Fender, Earl Erdman, Glenn Simmons, Mike Antonio, G. Jeffrey French, and two beloved friends and political playmates, Robert White and Dick Jensen.
Prairie Slavin, a family member.
Sam Kellogg, Rick Ulrich, Stephen Berryman, Marty Purcell, Vincent Cole Pistone, Joel Beeler, Thomas Aquinas Damian DaGosta, Tony Hernandez, Ned Smith, Ron Scott, Jim Lindberg, Stephen Tribble, Kenneth John Vandermolen, Larry Michael Scott, James Dean Cohen, Stephen Glenn Graff, Juan Marin, Fritz Fiedler, Bucky Marr and Ray Morton, Walter Owen Mike, Jack Clinton Woods, Michael Paul Slavin, Kevin Edward O'Connell, Larry Beck, Don Sparks Carr, Earl Conan Jr., Francis Edward Elliott, Robert Scott Fawcett, Mark Allen Wimmett, Orrin Lynn Klein, Dwayne Hinkeck, Jimmy Sprodlin, Joseph S. Marquez, Dwight Stapleton, Jeff Green, David Wilson, Kip Blackney, Henry Isaac Frankel, Richard Jensen, Bob White.
Carrie McWilliams, Missoula AIDS Council Executive Director.
Steve Farmer, James Farrell, Tom Flynn, Dr. Paul Frattinelli, Jean Fry, Michael Glenn, Dan Griswold, Johnny Goodman, Larry Hannon, Tony Hayward, Dayton Herzog, Joe Hesketh, Matthew Houston, Jim Jensen, Randy Jurgensen, Scotty Johnson, David Phoenix Jones, Merrill Key, Michael Cross, Paul Cruz, Logan, Steve Lundy, Jim McRae, Steve Marino, Bill Miller, Gianni Minikaki, Gary Mont, Austin O'Toole, Jim Passarelli, Dahl Rask, Wyatt Ray, Robert Rivera, Mike Ryan, Joe Sanchez, Abe Solis, Bill Standifer, Gary Stencil, Dwayne Stone King, Lauren Stout, Gordon Swain.
Brianne Burrows, editor of the Montanan Magazine and AIDS Quilt Steering Committee member.
Bob Bowser, Campha KP Sillabone, David Morris, Todd Hall, Gary Leon Keeper, Michael Hart, Ricky M. Pearl, Dario Serrano, Bill V. Needham, Wes Sanders, Emil DiPrezito, Gary Roy, Wally Beloserkowitz, Rusty Luders, Peter Schlegel, David Kennedy, Jim Shaughnessy, Wayne Vaughn, Gary Haber, Charles Dyke, Andy White, John Overstreet, Tyrone Sinclair, Jeffrey Jones, Nick Stoyanovich, Bob Fitzgerald, Alan Jernstad, Chuck Brandenburg, David Aldrich, Sean McCluskey, Bart Hammond, Bob Codici, Terry Henley, Tim Cooper, Michael Chapman, Zachary Knack, Patrick Judy, Michael Dorobic, James Henderson, George Turner.
Mary Muse, Adams Center Director and AIDS Quilt Steering Committee member.
Jay Wadsworth, Steve Schultz, James Sawtell, Roger Ehlers, Scott Bolden, Richard Avila, Kenneth McGahee, Poe Allen Gary, Frederick Sackett, Rick Holtz, James F. Brandt, Clarence Seymour Newhart, Dean C. Bina, Gordon Young, Tom, Donald Allen Wilson, Jan Joseph Geist, Clance Newhart, Kenton L. Zilmer, Nagib Saab, Bruce Brockway, Tom Morehouse, Richard Kohler, A. Dean Cook III, Richard William Ferraro, Jr., Paul Clark, Randy Lynn Wheeler, Mark Dwayne Carter, Ricky Knight, Roger Gray, James Edward Stoliker, James Bradley Edens, Michael Allen Pugh, Jan Meyer, Tim Ray Humphreys, David Jerry Garrett, Gary Bessemeyer, Jonathan Noyce, PhD.
Ray Davis, UM student and AIDS Quilt Steering Committee member.
Raymond Bush, Larry Charles Clance Jr., Greg McKinney, Jerry Temple, Denise Temple, Dan Temple, Ernesto Mazariegos, John F. Marcus, James Foxley, David P. Wilson, Eugene Ralph Fry, Michael L. Chetterbach, Jim, Jeremy, Kip Burnett Blackney, Jeffrey Hunter Castle, Jerry Newcomb, Raymond Lee Michael, Mark Batts, Raymond Michael, Robert K. Wilson, Barbara Engler, David D. Smith, Al Flagle, Brian Benevento, Jim Gores, Frederick James Lowe, David Elliott Nichols, Mark, Bo McCarthy, Alex Kammerer, Ken McEltry, Don Ripley, Guy Ripley, Jack Lauk, Alan Laufer, Thomas Lynn Sipe, Laura Andrea Hare Lee, Kenny Evans, and Stephen.
Steve Knight, Missoula AIDS Council board member.
Rick Pilato, Gilbert Pinheiro, Fred Ponder, Jimmy Ponder, David Schlageter, Stan Schobert, David Schumacher, Chuck Shively, Rick Stevens, David Stewart, Brad Stover, Tom Tull, Ron Washburn, the Bickersons, Sister Butch, Queenie, David Teague, Jimmy Daniel Pugh, Danny Boy, Michael Allen Reams, Raymond Belize, Pamela D. Garrett, Jean R. Howery, Alan R. Robertson, Dick Beck, Terrell Byrne, Mark Dempsey, Lara, Guy Utoven, John Lasher, Chip Benham, Paul Schneidler, Tony Harmon, Pedro Zamora, Cal Anderson, Dennis Papar, Connie G., Bernard G. Pierce, Ken Packard, William Charles Ford, James R. DuPaul, and three of my best friends, Sean Heavey, Ken Moore, and Bill McLaughlin.
Lisa Carter, Missoula AIDS Council Board Member.
James Christian Thomas, Spencer Lukowski, Joe Anthony Cuevas, Michael McCowan, Ray Harrington, Skip Loper, Mad John Fiak, Kathy Oliva, Mance McLaughlin, Dirk Myers, Akamu, Steve Capps, Kent Newby, Joey Patton, Larry Petrosky, Harold Murphy, Bob Smith, John Keene, Randy Pacheco, Stephen Ray Murrell, Lawrence J. Snyder, Arthur Ashe, Bill Hodges, Jerry Smith, Freddie Mercury Bolsara, Leonard Maltovic, Rock Hudson, Easy-E, Christopher Cash, Jay Deaton, Barnes Hickman Jr., Louis Aaron Kaufman, Mark Russell White, Craig Culver, Jeff Dugan, Ivan Lee Carter, Don Marshall, Rod Bingham, David Singleton, Bill Addy, Kip Burnett Blakeney.
We'd like to invite all of you to, who haven't done so, to come up to this level and look at the various parts of the quilt that are here. I want you to remember as you look at these quilts, the names on them represent every state in the Union and at least 28 other countries. The materials from which the panels are made range from burlap to champagne glasses, from racing silks to stuffed animals. And remember also that the battle against AIDS has not been won. The epidemic continues to take lives around the world and here in the United States. Please make a donation to support the work of the Missoula AIDS Council in attempting to eradicate this disease. And thank you very much for being here tonight.
introducing Sue, who is going to say a few words about John Ellis. He was a dear family friend.
Thank you. I think almost all of Missoula knew what a fine musician he was, what a splendid teacher at the university, what a great organist and caroller he was. But for those of us who sang with him as very bad members of the church choir, he was encouraging, and in addition, he had a wonderful, warm, and wicked sense of humor. He's very much missed.
Hi, my name is Gary, and finally, after many years of procrastinating, we were able to pull this off. And the incentive, of course, was the quilt coming to Missoula. So John was my teacher. He was a good friend, and I miss him.
Thank you. I'd also like to introduce my good friend, Rick Coleman. Rick's inducting his partner, Tony's panel.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you to the Missoula AIDS Council and Rita for bringing the quilt here. Tony was born in 1960 in McGargle, Texas, lived in Fort Worth and Dallas, and we met in 1983. September the 13th of this year would have been our 25th anniversary. Tony had bright eyes, a great smile, big heart. He was an excellent caregiver. He took care of my mother and father. And Tony and my mother died 2 weeks apart. And I know that he wanted me to do this, and it just took a long time. Thank you.
My name is Morgan Halverson. I'm board president of the Missoula AIDS Council, and I'd just like to say it's been a very moving 4 days. It's been amazing to talk to all the people that have come through the quilt and just the different feelings, experience that they've had here at the quilt, the different things that they identify with. If you've been to the quilt, if you've been to the quilt anywhere, you just notice there's all kinds of mementos, clothing items, poems, letters that are in the quilt, and to take the time and read them. People will spend literally hours here just going through and reading those stories, and you just find something you really identify with. And it just goes to show that, you know, AIDS and HIV touches everyone, and it's been a very moving experience.
My name is Mary Muse. I'm the director of the Adams Center, so I work for the University of Montana. And it's an interesting thing. We're at the last hour of the quilt, the AIDS Memorial Quilt being on display here in the building. And it has been a gift and a privilege to both work on it and to see this weekend come to fruition. It was, as we started, made the commitment to bring the quilt to the University of Montana and to Missoula, we looked on the calendar and looked for the right dates, and there were some mixed feelings about is homecoming the right weekend, and ultimately we decided to give it a try because we knew there would be so many guests in from out of town, and this would be a great weekend and a lot of traffic in and out of the building. In retrospect, I think it was absolutely a wonderful decision, and I have seen people who are huge Grizzly enthusiast fans and who would not have taken the time to come and see the quilt and have this experience. And when you think about one of the biggest objectives of having a display like this, it is to increase public awareness, and I believe we've made some great strides in that direction. I can't imagine that any person who could spend 5 minutes or an hour walking through here and looking at these quilts cannot be touched and feel compassion. There represents so many loss on so many different people, men, women, children, caregivers, gay people, the gamut. It is not an exclusive disease, and these panels tell that story. So I think this is one of the best exhibits and best experiences that I've had here in my directorship at the Adams Center. Thanks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're fortunate today to have with us the Montana Women's Chorus. They're going to sing a few songs for today's event. Thanks. Enjoy.
Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice and I keep on singing. Oh, yes, I hear music, and I keep on singing. Oh, yes, I hear music, and I keep on singing. Oh, yes, I hear music, and I keep on singing. Oh, yes, I hear music, and I keep on singing. Oh, yes, I hear music, and I keep on singing. Oh, yes, I hear music, and I keep on singing. Oh, yes, I hear music, and I keep on singing. Oh, yes, I hear music, and I keep on singing.
We would love for anybody to join us. This is something everybody knows. If you want to sing us, join us in singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And here's your note somewhere.
There's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. Someday I'll wish upon a star and wake up where the clouds are far behind me, where troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow blue, birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh, why can't I? If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't I?
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the MAC Board of Directors, we'd like to take a minute to thank a few people for the event this weekend. First and foremost, the University of Montana. This event wouldn't have happened without their support and their initiative. Specifically, Rita Munzenreiter and Mary Muse, and also Breanne Burrows and Ray Davis. It simply wouldn't have happened without them. We need to also thank Gert McMullen of the Names Project. She's been with the project from the inception in the 80s, and it's been a treasure to have her here. In addition to that, all the volunteers who gave their time this weekend. It's been a busy weekend, and we really appreciate that. The sponsors, of course. We have raised thousands of dollars for the Missoula AIDS Council, and that'll be put to good use, and we appreciate that. Also, David Wilson, who, if you were here on Thursday, you saw the piece that he had made for the quilt, and the proceeds of which will be going to the AIDS Council. Then the family, friends, spouses who were here for the induction ceremony, inducting the new panels into the quilt. Also the attendees this weekend. They traveled from all across the state even from neighboring states. Over the last 4 days, I've been very grateful for the opportunity to speak with a lot of people who take something different away from the quilt, each of them. It's the mementos, the clothing, the letters that you read on the quilt. Everyone has a different story of something that they've taken away that's really personal to them. In a time when we read about an alarming rise in the new infections, an event like this is really a sober reminder that we must not ever be complacent in the fight against HIV/AIDS. Again, we just thank all of the volunteers and the organizers. We've achieved a lot this weekend. Thanks.
Lisa, how did the volunteer coordination this weekend go?
I think it went great. It was just seamless from my perspective. We had lots of great volunteers who were willing to pitch in and do whatever we needed them to do. It went very, very well. We had a lot of help from the retired senior volunteer program. Those guys were great as some team leaders, and I just couldn't be happier.
How many volunteers helped out this weekend?
I think we had close to 100 over the 4-day event, and quite a few people who worked multiple days.
Great.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Hi, my name is Gert McMullen, and I work with the Names Project AIDS Memorial Quilt. I'm their quilt production coordinator, and just come out on displays here. We're out here this weekend, or actually for the last 4 days, at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana, and it's been really wonderful. We've had 3 new panels that came in, and quite a few visitors and quite a few students, and I think that they did a really good job in educating them in compassion about the quilt.
My name is Carrie McWilliams. I'm the Executive Director of Missoula AIDS Council. It's been an amazing 4 days. We've had the honor and privilege to host roughly 101 blocks from the Names Project AIDS Memorial Quilt. So for the past 4 days, the Adams Center has been filled with the names and faces and memories of those who have died from AIDS-related illnesses. I think it's been an incredibly powerful and moving experience, not just for Missoula AIDS Council and the University of Montana, but the entire community. We've had people traveling from across the state to view their loved ones' panels. We've had school groups coming through, which I think is incredibly important. We've had multiple tour groups from Hellgate High School, and that was the primary hope with this display, is that one, we would be able to honor and remember the loved ones who have passed away, but second, that we'd also be able to generate awareness and remind people that the epidemic is not over, that there's still infections every day in this country, and that we just need to continue to generate that awareness and education. Without a cure or vaccine, prevention and education are the only tools that we have to prevent the transmission of new infections. So this whole event would not have been possible without the University of Montana. They've been a very gracious host. And then there's been several other community businesses and partners, Community Medical Center, First Interstate Bank, Southgate Mall, the Montana Cancer Specialists were among our major sponsors. The volunteer effort has been absolutely amazing. So it's been a tremendous 4 days, and we just hope that the Missoula community was able to experience it.